I looked at myself in the mirror that night. Really looked for the first time in months. Saw the woman who'd spent 28 years trying to be good enough for a family that had already decided she wasn't. I am Emma, the daughter who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for college because Dad said it would be character building, while Caroline got a trust fund for living expenses. The sister who'd accepted every slight, every dismissal, every closed door because that's what you did when you were the disappointing one. The woman who'd convinced herself that if she just tried harder, achieved more, proved herself somehow, they would finally see her value. Then I'll stop trying to be, I said out loud to my reflection. The words surprised me, coming from somewhere deep and certain. They didn't feel bitter or angry or vengeful. They felt like clarity. Like finally seeing something that had been true all along but I'd been too afraid or too loyal or too hopeful to admit. I wasn't going to keep begging for acceptance from people who'd already decided I was worth less. I wasn't going to keep fighting for scraps of an inheritance that was legally mine. I wasn't going to keep playing this game where Caroline made the rules and I always lost. I was going to stop playing entirely. I was going to stop letting her define me. I was going to stop trying to fit into a family that had never made space for me. If you've ever been denied your right, this video is for you. Kindly click the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from in the comment section. Going through old files Dad had left me, boxes I'd stored in my apartment closet after the funeral, I found something strange tucked into a folder marked, Personal, Emma. It was hidden behind tax documents and property deeds and old insurance policies. A legal draft, printed on official letterhead from Mr. Patterson's firm, the paper slightly yellowed but the text clear. The title made my hands shake. Ethical Stewardship Clause, Amendment to Whitmore Family Trust. I read it once quickly, then again slowly, hardly believing what I was seeing. Both heirs must jointly affirm their commitment to ethical stewardship in a public forum before final disbursement of funds. This affirmation must include a statement of intent regarding charitable use and family legacy, delivered in the presence of witnesses and recorded for trust documentation. Both heirs must participate willingly and publicly. Failure to complete this requirement within 5 years of the trust activation shall result in immediate judicial review and potential restructuring of the entire trust, including possible reassignment of control. The clause continued with more legal language, but the core meaning was clear. This clause had never been mentioned at the reading. Never discussed in any meeting with Mr. Patterson. Never brought up by Caroline. But it was dated 2 months before Dad died, signed by him in his shaky late-stage handwriting and properly notarized by a witness I didn't recognize. It was real. It was legally binding. And it meant Caroline didn't have complete control after all. When I called Mr. Patterson's office the next morning and quoted the clause word for word, his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. "Where did you get that document?" His professional composure had disappeared. "My father left it for me. In his personal files." "Is it legitimate?" Long pause. Papers rustling in the background. Whispered conversation with someone else in the room. "Miss Emma, you weren't supposed to see that draft. That was an early version of the trust documents. But it's dated after the main trust was finalized. And it's signed and notarized. That makes it a legal amendment, doesn't it?" Another pause, even longer this time. I could practically hear him consulting law books in his mind. "I need to consult with my partners before I can comment on this. Don't discuss this with anyone, especially not with your sister." Not yet. But I'd already heard the truth in his voice, in that moment of panic when I'd quoted the clause. This was real. This was enforceable. And if Caroline refused the public affirmation, if she couldn't stand up in front of witnesses and declare her ethical commitment to the trust's mission, the entire $400 million could be delayed indefinitely. Maybe even restructured entirely. Maybe even taken out of her control. For the first time in months since that awful Thanksgiving dinner, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Dad had left me a key. He'd known Caroline might try to lock me out, might try to take control, might use the trust for her own image instead of actual good. So he'd built in a lock she couldn't control, a requirement she couldn't fulfill alone. I just had to figure out how to use it. Instead of confronting Caroline directly, instead of calling her and demanding answers or threatening legal action, I planned something quieter. Something that would seem innocent on the surface but would force her hand in a way she couldn't refuse or manipulate. An event in Dad's honor. Something public and meaningful. I started making calls, carefully pulling together a committee of people who'd known Dad through his actual charity work. Not the high society galas but the real grassroots projects. Not Caroline's crowd of wealthy donors and foundation executives. Real people who'd worked alongside him, who'd believed in what he believed in, who remembered his values. We should do something to celebrate his legacy, I suggested to Marcus, the director of the youth center Dad had supported for 20 years with both time and money. Maybe an auction. Something to raise money for the scholarship fund. Keep his memory alive in a practical way. Marcus loved the idea immediately. His enthusiasm genuine. The Whitmore Legacy Auction, he said, already planning. We could invite all the organizations he supported, auction off donated items, share stories. It would be beautiful. When were you thinking? 2 months from now. Give people time to prepare. It was the perfect place for a public affirmation. The perfect place for Caroline to either live up to Dad's values or reveal publicly that she couldn't. And she would come. I was absolutely certain of it. Caroline never missed an opportunity for public recognition, never passed up a chance to be seen and photographed and praised. I sent Caroline an engraved invitation exactly 2 weeks before the event. Cream cardstock, the expensive kind with deckled edges. Elegant script printed by a professional stationer. Formal and proper. The kind of invitation she couldn't refuse without looking petty or cruel. The message was simple but carefully worded. In honor of our father. The Whitmore Legacy Auction. Saturday, June 15th, 7 p.m. Riverside Community Center. Your presence would mean everything. For Dad. I didn't call to follow up. Didn't email or text. Just sent the invitation to her office address and waited, checking my phone obsessively for 3 days. She called on the 4th day, her voice tight with suspicion. What is this, Emma? Why am I just now hearing about some auction in Dad's name? It's an event honoring Dad's memory. Raising money for his scholarship fund and the programs he cared about. The community center wanted to do something. Why wasn't I consulted? I run the family foundation. This should have gone through proper channels. It's open to everyone who knew Dad. I thought you'd want to be there. To speak maybe. Share memories. Silence on the line. I could almost hear her calculating, weighing options, trying to figure out if this was a trap. But her ego wouldn't let her stay away. Of course I'll be there, she said finally, her voice regaining its usual confidence. I am the head of the family foundation after all. I'll prepare remarks. And I'll bring the foundation photographer. I smiled, alone in my apartment. I thought you'd say that. She hung up without saying goodbye, without asking any more questions. But I knew she'd come. She couldn't resist an audience. She couldn't stand the idea of people honoring Dad without her at the center of it. The night before the event, I stood alone on the small community center stage where it would all happen. Empty folding chairs faced me in neat rows, maybe 200 of them. The lights were soft, the room quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and distant traffic outside. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, working with Marcus and his team, making sure everything was in place. The guest list was carefully curated. 3 board members from Dad's favorite charities, people who knew his actual values. 2 journalists who covered non-profit work in the city. A video crew documenting the event for the Scholarship Fund's website, their presence completely normal and expected. Local business owners Dad had mentored. Teachers from the schools he'd supported. All perfectly innocent. All completely reasonable. I walked to the microphone stand and whispered into the empty room. Lord, I don't want revenge. I just want peace and truth. And I meant it with everything in me. This wasn't about hurting Caroline, about humiliating her the way she'd humiliated me. It was about finally standing up for what was right. About honoring Dad's actual wishes, not the sanitized version Caroline had created for public consumption. About stopping the lies and the manipulation and the locked doors. About reclaiming my inheritance and my dignity. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether this worked or failed spectacularly, at least I would know I'd tried. At least I would know I hadn't just accepted defeat. At least I could look at myself in the mirror and see someone who'd fought back to get what's mine. The auction night arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of perfect June evening that felt like a gift. People filled the community center starting at 6:30, dressed in business casual, carrying drinks from the cash bar and programs we'd printed. The energy was warm, genuine, so different from Caroline's polished galas. I wore a simple black dress, nothing fancy, nothing designer. Borrowed heels from Alexis. Hair pulled back in a neat bun. Caroline arrived at 7:15, fashionably late, making an entrance as always. She wore diamonds at her throat and ears. A designer gown in emerald green, completely inappropriate for the venue but stunning nonetheless. And she hadn't come alone. Photographers I hadn't invited followed her in, cameras flashing. She'd brought her own publicity team. Her own documentation of what she expected to be another triumph. "Emma," she said, air-kissing near my cheek without actually making contact. Her perfume was expensive and overwhelming. "This is quite the turnout. Very community-oriented. Dad was loved by a lot of people." Small venue though, isn't it? Intimate. I would have been happy to host this at the Foundation Hall. Much more appropriate space for this kind of thing. This felt more authentic. More like Dad. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. The program began right on time. Musical performances by students from the scholarship program. Their talent raw and real. Speeches from people whose lives Dad had actually changed. Their gratitude genuine and moving. Real stories, real impact, real emotion. I watched Caroline's smile get tighter and more fixed with each heartfelt testimonial. This wasn't her polished gala with rehearsed speeches and carefully managed emotions. This was actual human connection, messy and real and impossible to control. Finally, near the end of the program, the host announced, "And now, to honor the Whitmore sisters, daughters of our beloved benefactor, who continue his legacy." I walked onto the stage, my hands surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. Caroline followed a step behind, confusion flickering across her perfectly made-up face. This wasn't in the printed program she'd received. I'd kept this part secret, had told the host only an hour before. At the microphone, I pulled out a folded paper from my pocket. Dad's words, copied directly from the ethical stewardship clause. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases. "Before we close tonight, I want to share something my father wrote," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. These words were part of his final instructions to us, his daughters, about the trust he established. I read slowly, clearly, making sure every word landed. Ethical stewardship is not about control but about character. It is not about personal gain but about community good. It is not about image but about integrity. It is not about power but about purpose. I turned to Caroline, looking her directly in the eyes. The room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had stopped moving. Dad wrote these words as part of the trust agreement. He wanted both of us to publicly affirm our commitment to these principles. To stand together and declare, in front of witnesses, that we would honor his values. I held out my hand to her, the gesture both invitation and challenge. "Caroline, will you join me in affirming that commitment publicly? Will you state here and now, in front of all these people who love Dad, that you're committed to ethical stewardship of our family's resources? That you'll use the trust for genuine good, not just for appearances?" Silence stretched like pulled taffy. A murmur rippled through the room. Caroline's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. For a moment I thought she might do it. Might just say yes, affirm the principles, and move on. It would have been so easy. For words. Yes, I commit completely. But Caroline had never been good at sharing attention, at letting anyone else hold the spotlight. She'd never been comfortable with anything she hadn't scripted and controlled and managed. She stepped closer to the microphone, shouldering me slightly aside. Her voice came out sharp and defensive. I don't need to prove anything to her. The words were louder than she'd intended, amplified across the room by the sound system. Gasps followed. Actual, audible gasps from the audience. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I've been managing the family foundation for 2 years, Caroline continued, her voice rising, digging herself deeper. I've raised millions of dollars. I've won awards. I've been featured in magazines. Everyone here knows my commitment to charity. Everyone here has seen my work. I don't need to perform some theatrical affirmation because my sister is feeling insecure and jealous. The cameras were recording everything. The video crew I'd invited was capturing every word, every expression, and every moment of Caroline's carefully built image cracking in real time. Her own photographers had lowered their cameras, uncertain. She realized it too late. Her eyes found the cameras, swept across the shocked faces in the audience, and her face went white. This is manipulation, she said, but her voice wavered now, losing its certainty. This is entrapment. You planned this to make me look bad. I asked you to affirm Dad's values, I said quietly into the microphone. That's all. To commit publicly to the principles he believed in. Why would that make you look bad unless you can't honestly make that commitment? By morning everything had changed. The video had spread through non-profit circles like wildfire. Not viral in the mainstream sense, not yet, but the philanthropic community was small and interconnected and deeply interested in ethical questions. The journalists at the event had written articles that posted before sunrise. Philanthropy heiress refuses ethical pledge at charity event. Questions raised about Whitmore Foundation leadership. Sister challenges foundation director's commitment to deceased father's values. The foundation's board called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. I didn't have to do anything else. The situation had its own momentum now, rolling downhill, picking up speed. Caroline called me at 7 in the morning. Her voice raw from crying or yelling or both. You planned this. You set me up. You manipulated everything just to humiliate me. I asked you to make a public commitment to Dad's values, I said calmly, tiredly. That's all I did. You knew I'd say no. You knew it would make me look bad. Did I? Why would you say no, Caroline? Why couldn't you just affirm what Dad believed in? Why was that so impossible? Silence. Then sobbing, ugly and real in a way I'd never heard from my perfect sister. The board suspended me pending review. They're investigating the foundation's finances. They're questioning every grant, every expense, every decision I've made. They're treating me like a criminal. Then you should have nothing to worry about if everything was handled ethically. They're going to find things. Not illegal things but questionable things. Expenses that look bad. Grants to organizations connected to my friends. It's going to destroy everything. She hung up before I could respond. Mr. Patterson called an hour later. His voice carefully neutral and professional. We need to meet. Both of you. This situation has legal implications for the trust. Caroline asked to meet for dinner before the lawyer meeting. Just the two of us. No attorneys, no family members, no foundation board observers. Just sisters. Almost said no. Tyler told me I was crazy to go. She'll try to manipulate you, he warned. She'll cry and apologize and then go right back to controlling everything once this blows over. But something in Caroline's voice on the phone had sounded different. Broken in a way that seemed real. Hear her out, I told Tyler. I might be surprised. And if I'm not, at least I'll know I tried. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, nothing fancy, the kind of place neither of us would normally choose. Caroline looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Diminished somehow. No makeup or very little. Hair in a simple ponytail. Wearing jeans and a sweater. Casual in a way that seemed wrong on her. When she spoke, her hands shook visibly. I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone, not even my therapist. She took a shaky breath. When Dad was dying in those last few days in the hospital, he called me to his room alone. He sent you away, sent everyone away. He told me he was worried about you. Worried about me, I repeated, not understanding. He said you were too gentle for this world. Too trusting, too idealistic, too naive about how money and power actually work. He made me promise, made me swear on Mom's memory, that I would protect you. Protect me from what? From yourself. From bad decisions. From people who might take advantage of your kindness. From wasting the trust on causes that wouldn't actually make a difference. She looked down at her hands. I was terrified you'd waste the money, Emma. Terrified you'd prove him right. Prove that you really couldn't handle this responsibility. 'Cause Dad loved you more. Everyone knew it. Everyone saw it. You were his favorite, his special one, his brilliant girl. And I thought if I controlled everything, if I managed the trust perfectly, if I proved I was responsible and capable, maybe I could finally be worthy too. The lawyers reinstated me as full co-beneficiary the following week. The Foundation's investigation had found nothing illegal in Caroline's management, no embezzlement or fraud, but the public incident had damaged her credibility beyond repair. Board members had resigned. Donors had pulled funding. The media attention had been overwhelming and mostly negative. They wanted changes, needed changes, to restore public trust. You could demand full control, Mr. Patterson said, looking at me across the conference table in his office. Given the circumstances, given the ethical stewardship clause your father included, given your sister's public refusal to affirm the principles, the court would almost certainly grant you sole authority over the entire trust. I looked at Caroline, sitting across the conference table looking exhausted and defeated. She'd lost weight in the past week. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her usual armor of perfection had crumbled completely. I thought about what she'd told me at dinner. About Dad's deathbed instructions that had poisoned everything between us. About her fear and insecurity and desperate need to prove herself. About spending our whole lives competing for a love that should have been unconditional. Split it evenly, I told the lawyers. Equal access, equal say, equal responsibility. That's what joint stewardship actually means. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. But add one condition, I continued firmly. The Foundation's board must include outside oversight. Independent members not connected to our family or our social circle. People who care about the mission more than the image. People who will ask hard questions and demand real accountability. Mr. Patterson nodded, making notes. That's very reasonable. Very ethical, actually. Emma, Caroline whispered, her voice breaking. Why would you? Because this isn't about revenge, I said, meeting her eyes. It's about doing what's actually right. What Dad actually wanted, not what fear made us think he wanted. The backlash against Caroline continued even after the lawyers settled everything and restored my access to the trust. Her husband, Marcus, no, I need a different name. Her husband, Brandon, a businessman who'd loved her family connections and social status more than he'd ever loved her, filed for divorce within a month. The papers were delivered to her apartment while I was there, and I watched her face crumple as she read them. Her PR team quit, saying they couldn't rebuild an image based on lies and couldn't work with someone who'd so publicly demonstrated poor judgment. Her friends stopped calling. The country club memberships quietly lapsed. Invitations to galas dried up. Her social media, once full of congratulations and admiration, filled with criticism and questions. I watched it all happen and felt pity instead of triumph, sadness instead of satisfaction. This was what she'd been terrified of all along, what had driven every controlling behavior and manipulative decision. Being seen as not good enough, not perfect, not worthy, being revealed as flawed and human. My prayer that night was different from all the others I'd written in my journal. Lord, don't let me gloat. Let me grow. Let this make me better, not bitter. 'Cause it would be so easy to feel victorious right now. To feel like justice had finally been served. To enjoy watching Caroline lose everything she'd valued. But watching my sister lose her marriage and her reputation and her carefully constructed life didn't feel like winning. It felt sad and empty. Tyler found me sitting by the window of our apartment, staring out at the city lights blurring through tears. I hadn't realized I was crying. "You okay?" he asked gently, sitting beside me. "I think so. I just wish it didn't have to be like this. I wanted her to change, not to be destroyed. You gave her grace she didn't deserve. You could have taken everything. Maybe that's the whole point of grace. That nobody deserves it." 3 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I received an unexpected email from someone named Catherine Morrison at the Northwest Arts Foundation. Wait, I can't use Morrison. Catherine Bradford. They wanted to meet with me about a potential opportunity. I assumed it was about a donation request, that they'd seen the news coverage and wanted access to the trust money. Instead, when I arrived at their offices, they offered me a job. "We've been following your situation closely," Catherine said, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. "The way you handled the trust dispute, the charity event, the emphasis on ethical oversight and accountability. We're impressed with your integrity." "I'm not sure I understand," I said cautiously. "We're creating a new position. Director of Ethical Initiatives. Someone to help foundations and nonprofits maintain integrity, avoid conflicts of interest, ensure mission alignment over image management. Someone to ask the hard questions and hold organizations accountable to their stated values." She leaned forward. "You'd be perfect for it. You've lived the consequences of poor stewardship. You understand how power corrupts charitable work. And you've demonstrated the courage to challenge it publicly." The salary was modest but livable, significantly more than my current nonprofit job. The work was meaningful, exactly the kind of thing I'd always wanted to do. I'd gone from the forgotten sister to the face of reform in just 3 months. I accepted the position that same day, signed the paperwork right there in Catherine's office. When I told Caroline later that week over coffee, she surprised me by smiling. A real smile, sad but genuine. "You're going to be good at that," she said quietly. "Better than me. You actually care about doing the right thing, not just looking like you're doing the right thing." It was the first genuine compliment she'd ever given me. The first time she'd acknowledged that I might be better at something than she was. Caroline showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening about 2 months later. No warning, no call ahead, no text message. Just knocked on the door at 8 o'clock. When I opened it, she looked absolutely destroyed. Mascara streaked down her face in dark trails. Hair tangled and unbrushed. Wearing sweatpants and an old college t-shirt I remembered from years ago. No jewelry, no makeup, no armor at all. "I've lost everything," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My marriage, my position at the foundation, my friends, my reputation. Everyone thinks I'm a fraud and a terrible person." I stood aside, letting her in. She collapsed on my couch, crying in great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "I don't know who I am without all of that," she said between gasps. "Without being perfect Caroline, the golden daughter, the foundation director, the philanthropist. I don't know how to be just me. Just a regular person who makes mistakes." "I know the feeling," I said softly, sitting beside her. She looked up, surprised, her eyes red and swollen. "You always seemed so comfortable being yourself. So confident in who you were." "No, I seemed comfortable being invisible. There's a difference. I just got really good at pretending it didn't hurt." We sat in silence for a while. The only sound was Caroline's gradually slowing tears and the distant traffic outside. Then she said something I never ever expected to hear from my sister's mouth. "Can you pray with me?" "What?" "You wrote about prayer in your journal. I found it at the estate when I was packing up my things. You prayed every night, asking God to help you see meaning in the pain." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I need that. I need to believe this all means something, that I can be something other than what I've been." I hesitated. Religion had never been Caroline's thing. She'd always been too sophisticated for faith, too pragmatic for prayer. But I took her hands anyway. They were cold and trembling. For the first time in our entire lives, she let me lead her in something that mattered. Weeks later, another surprise call came, this one from Patricia Chen. No, I can't use that name either. Patricia Henderson, the chairwoman of the Whitmore Foundation's board. I assumed they were calling to discuss the restructuring, the new oversight requirements I'd insisted on. We'd like to reinstate Caroline to the foundation, she said without preamble. With significant conditions, of course. What kind of conditions? Asked carefully. She'd work under mentorship, learning proper nonprofit management, ethical governance, community engagement, financial transparency. We think she has potential and skills that could be valuable, but she needs guidance. Real guidance, not just people telling her what she wants to hear. There was a pause, heavy with meaning. We'd like you to be her mentor, Emma. You'd oversee her work, approve her decisions, teach her what ethical stewardship actually looks like in practice. It would be a substantial time commitment on top of your new position, but we'd compensate you fairly. And we believe it's what your father would have wanted. Not separation but reconciliation. Not punishment but redemption. The irony wasn't lost on me. Caroline, who'd locked me out of everything, would now report to me. Who'd controlled every aspect of the trust, would now need my approval. Who'd dismissed me as incompetent, would now learn from me. But it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like something bigger, something I hadn't planned or orchestrated. Like redemption, like a story being written by someone with better vision than mine. I'll do it, I said after a long moment. But only if Caroline genuinely wants this. I won't force change on someone who doesn't want to change. When I told Caroline about the offer, meeting her at the same quiet restaurant where she'd confessed Dad's deathbed instructions, she cried again. But this time from relief, from gratitude, from something that looked almost like hope. I don't deserve this, she whispered. None of us deserve grace, I said, echoing the prayer I'd written so many times in my journal. That's what makes it grace. That's what makes it powerful enough to change us. Working together was strange at first, awkward and uncomfortable. Caroline struggled with taking direction, with admitting what she didn't know, with being vulnerable about her mistakes. She'd built her entire identity on being perfect, and learning required admitting imperfection. But slowly, over weeks and then months, something shifted between us. We weren't enemies anymore. We weren't competitors fighting for scraps of approval. We were sisters learning to be family. Real family, messy and honest and genuine. At our first board meeting together 6 months after her reinstatement, Caroline and I presented a revised mission statement for the Whitmore Foundation. We'd worked on it for weeks, arguing and compromising and finally finding language that honored Dad's actual values. Clear goals, measurable outcomes, community partnerships, transparent finances. Real work instead of performative charity. Impact over image. The board approved it unanimously. Several members commented on how refreshing it was to see siblings working together so effectively, so honestly. Afterward, as we packed up our materials and presentation boards, Caroline turned to me suddenly. Her voice was quiet, almost shy. I still don't understand how you forgave me. After everything I did, everything I took from you, how you could give me another chance. I smiled, remembering all the prayers, all the pain, all the growth that had brought us to this moment. Remembering the journal entries and the locked doors and the woman in the mirror who'd finally found her voice. Because mercy is the only currency that never loses value, I said. Because holding on to bitterness would have destroyed me more than it hurt you. Because Dad's trust was supposed to bring out the best in us, not the worst. And because you're my sister, and family means giving people room to grow. She nodded slowly, tears sliding down her cheeks, like she was beginning to understand something fundamental she'd missed her whole life. Dad would be proud of you, she said softly. Of us, I corrected firmly. He'd be proud of what we built together, of how we turned pain into purpose, of how we chose grace over grudges. And just like that, the balance was restored. Not through power or control or revenge. Not through courts or lawyers or public humiliation, though those had played their necessary roles. Not through winning or losing or keeping score. But through something quieter and stronger and infinitely more transformative. Through grace that changed both of us completely. Through forgiveness that freed us both from the prison of our past. Through mercy that taught us what Dad had tried to tell us all along, that the real inheritance wasn't the $400 million. It was learning to love each other despite our flaws. Learning to see each other as human instead of as competition. Learning that wealth means nothing if it costs you your soul, your integrity, your ability to look at yourself in the mirror with peace. The trust was finally serving its real purpose. Not making us wealthy, we'd always been that. But making us better. Making us whole. Not dividing us with money and power games, but teaching us what family actually meant when you stripped away all the performance and pretense and fear. Caroline reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For not giving up on me. For believing I could be better." "Always," I said, squeezing back. "That's what sisters do." We walked out of that boardroom together, not as rivals or as victor and defeated, but as partners. Family. As two women who'd learned the hardest way possible that the only thing worth inheriting is the wisdom to use what you have with integrity. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than $400 million could ever buy.